were a bit raunchy and raucous.
We kept you on a really short leash.
Nice to be on someone's leash sometimes.
I was gonna say, with that hair, you better play an instrument. It is so rock and roll. I love it.
I think she's a they. That didn't come out right. Can you do this?
People would do
a
anything for a
donut?
t-shirt.
That's like genius. Hey everyone, welcome to the Rainbow Remix. I am JD Downer flying solo again today. Denise is feeling a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to be here for the duration with our very special guest, Kestral
Gaian.
Kestral Gaian. What an interesting talent you are. Can you tell us about your what your current work is and what you've done in the past? Because I know you're an author and a poet. Do you do live readings when you do poetry?
I do. I love to read poems out live to groups of people. It's such a spoken poetry. I think is so beautiful and so underrated. And I think often we find ourselves having to put on events that are like, let's compete to see who has like the best poem and that kind of thing. Whereas actually just being in a room full of people, hearing great words that they've written is really wonderful.
Yes.
I love sharing poetry verbally.
Yes, it is a beautiful, very beautiful experience. I had never been to an author's reading. This was not a poetry reading. It was an author's reading of Elizabeth Gilbert's new book, All the Way to the River. And wow, like that was almost, it was just, I felt like I was in church for 2 hours. It was almost 2 hours. Hearing the words and the experience, because it's a memoir of hers, coming from the person who experienced this and wrote this book, was just an amazing experience. You walked away wanting to read the book even more. A lot of people had already read the book, but hearing it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak, is so much more meaningful. And with poetry, it's even deeper, I find, because do you find when you write a poem, other people take different things from that, different feelings from what you originally wrote that to be?
I think that's true of everything that I write, whether it's a fiction novel or poetry, kind of singular or multiple. I think everyone will always take their own meaning and their own interpretation of something. I do think that that's even more prevalent with poetry because it resonates on such a deeply emotional level. So I think poems trigger different things for different people in the same way that someone can look at the same painting and feel something completely different to the person next to them. So I think is true of poetry and poems in general. But I think that translates to people's relationships with characters in fiction books as well. You can have very similar people who will have entirely different favorite characters in a book or will have taken something completely different from an interaction between two characters in a scene.
Oh, most definitely. I'm a songwriter, so very much the same way as with a poem. People will hear a song and think I wrote that for a completely different reason than why I wrote it. But they took something away from that song that was meaningful to them. So that's where I believe art is so beautiful, because it could be abstract in a way where everyone gets what they need from that poem, that story, that song, that painting.
And of course, every interpretation is correct in its own way.
Exactly.
So whatever anyone takes away from a poem or a story that I've written is fine and is valid, whether or not it's how I felt when I created it. It doesn't matter, and I think it's one of the scary but really gratifying things about creating art in general is that the second it is observed by anyone else, it's out of your hands. It's
Yes.
out there in the world with a life of its own, and people will interact with it and interpret it in whatever way they do, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's almost like Jerry Garcia, when the Grateful Dead would play, they allowed taping sections where it's so much taboo with all the other artists, because the labels want to sell records, so they didn't want people taping concerts. But his perspective was the music doesn't belong to us once we play it out in the world. It's not ours anymore. And I think that's a really beautiful way to look at that. Like I said, with any kind of art. So I wanted to ask you, like in particular in your writings, when I was reading in the press section of your website, frequently asked questions, and someone asked you, is every character you write about queer? And you said, not every character is queer, but they're the most interesting, or something to that degree. um, and so, do you write from the perspective of a place that you couldn't find when you were a young child, and couldn't find something to relate to in books and movies?
Yes, I think in many ways I do. So when I think about the stories I've written, and so I mean, I have a new fiction book coming out in February called The Boy from Elsewhere, and one of the kind of defining characteristics of this book is that almost all of the characters are in some way, shape, or form queer, but for none of them there is the main storyline about them being queer. And I think that was a really important thing for me, because growing up, I didn't really have that kind of, oh, here are these people doing XYZ awesome thing, and they just happen to be queer as well. Like, it wasn't ever that people could do things and be queer. It was always either the representation was all about their queerness, or it was them being used as the butt of a joke or as an example of something not to be. Whereas, so in The Boy from Elsewhere, for example, all of the protagonists in the book are in some way queer, but in kind of a variety of different ways. And you only really get to know that over the course of the story because of the way they interact with the world and with each other. And in some ways, it's just one offhand comment, and in other ways, it's a smaller but defined part of the story. But none of it is about their journey, they know who they are and they're fine with that, and that's just who they are, and they're off saving the world, and they'd have done that regardless. But I think just seeing and having queer role models who are able to go off and do anything they want to do is really important, and not something that I think we've had enough of. So when I say like the most interesting characters that I've written are queer, I think that's probably by design, because I will any character that I think is really cool, I will probably try and nudge them in the direction of being queer, because I think, well, the world needs more kick-ass queer people doing awesome things.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that approach. It's that you're right. Like, so many stories are written, movies and books, that if there is a character that's queer or gay or lesbian, that's what they're all about. That's what that character is. It's not that they're queer, gay, lesbian, and they're a doctor and they're saving people's lives. And that's what the story is about. A doctor that's saving people's lives. And the fact that they're queer is not the point of that character. So it does bring such a normalization to that, especially for young people who are, feeling that they're not going to be what the world, quote unquote, calls the norm. It's so important to see that there's more depth to a person than their sexuality. What else do they have to bring to the world? And I think that's awesome that you're taking that approach.
I think I once, probably about 10 years ago, I read an article that, and the conclusion of it was basically sometimes you just need to be who you needed when you were younger. And I've kind of tried to live by that a little bit and think, well, what would me sort of age 10 or me age 15 or me age 20 really need?
Uh-huh.
And try and put a little bit of that into the world so that people have that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I come from a time, I'm much older than you are, where it was not accepted to, normal mainstream world to be gay. And so I was not brought up in a homophobic household whatsoever. However, society was more so mainstream that whatever feelings I did have growing up, I just kind of buried. And it seems unusual to people who ask me, I was married to a man for 25 years, and how did you not realize? Like, it didn't, I don't know why, it didn't occur to me until I was probably about 30. So, I did get married young, but I was 30 and realized that's not who I was. And I wish there were more things like what you're writing when I was younger, so I could have seen that it was okay, that there's not only one way to be. It's very important, the work that you're doing for people who, especially who are younger, questioning who they are.
When I was growing up in the UK, there was a law in place called Section 28, and that law was essentially a don't say gay law. It was a law that banned the discussion or promotion of any kind of homosexual or related kind of phrase or term or anything like that in schools and any kind of public institution in the
Wow.
UK. And that law was in place during the 80s and the 90s in the UK. And so when I was growing up, that was in place, and it had that you kind of, as you were saying there, it had a real sort of silencing effect, because growing up during that time, you lack the language, you lack the words, you lack the exposure. It's
Hmm.
not just about not having role models, it's about not even knowing that you can be anything
Yes.
else. And I mean, for me, the way that manifested is that I knew that I was not a kind of man attracted to women. So I just kind of assumed I was gay, but I had no idea that the other kind of gender identities existed or anything like that until I was really in my late 20s. Um, and I think as much as that has improved to a degree, the way that we cement that in place and the way that we normalize those things and make sure that we don't slip back into a world where it's really easy to erase those things from public discourse and from knowledge and from learning. The way we combat that is to keep writing about it, to keep making it a normal part of that's who this character is, that's who this person is, so that those narratives are always there and those identities are always there. And it's the more examples of a thing there are, the harder it becomes to deny that it exists.
Absolutely. That's a very good way to put that. And like you said, so important for people, for kids to see that, because even like when I was growing up, I wanted to be a professional tennis player. That should have been the first clue, sort of, right there, that I was obsessed with Billie Jean King and all the women of that era, Virginia Wade from the UK. And so I didn't realize why I was, I mean, I did like playing tennis, but I didn't realize also what my attraction to that whole world was, per se. And what didn't help is the fact that my sheroes or heroes of the time, which was Billie Jean, was hiding the fact that she was a lesbian and she was married for a lot of years. Like at that point, she was married for like 25, 30 years, um, and didn't come out till way later. So, maybe had she been out like she is now, maybe, and I was a younger person, I would be like, it's okay to be like Billie Jean in every way, but not just playing tennis, but she was married to a man, and you just kind of followed. And I mean, I get why she had it was the way the world was back then. So, that's the way it was. And so it is so important that so many celebrities and people who young people revere as their heroes are their true selves, because it makes it easier to go to your parents or go to your friends and say, this is who I am. I mean, even as an adult, when I came out, completely out, because when you come out later in life, you kind of like eased out, like yanked out a bit at a time. So people know, but you don't know that they know. So you think they don't know. And I just was worried each time I would say that to a friend, who I was now after I got divorced, what they would think. And every single one of them was absolutely fine with it. My main concern was they would say, why didn't you think I'd be okay with this? Like, how come you didn't tell me from that perspective? Like, be upset with me for not trusting them with that, but everyone was like cool, and it made that so much easier. But to be able to realize who you are from the beginning is so much more freeing, and would shape your life going forward so much differently. I totally believe that.
And I think there's something about trying to encourage people to be open to the idea that it's all right to not necessarily know who you are, and to explore that. I
Mm-hmm.
think so many people
True.
that I speak to who come out later in life, particularly as trans or non-binary,
Uh-huh.
say, "Well, I just didn't feel like I could explore that side of me." And I think, you know, if more cisgender people explored their gender identity and were like, "Oh no, okay, I'm definitely cisgender, but I at least looked into it," we'd have a
Right.
much more understanding, much more tolerant world.
Yes. Yes, very true. Do you still live in the UK? Are you based there?
I do, yes. I live in Scotland at the
Oh.
moment, so a slightly more scenic and a slightly damper part of the UK. Um, but I've lived all over the UK, so I've lived in London and on the south coast and in Yorkshire and now in Scotland. Um, it's yeah, there's a for a small island, we have a huge diversity of different kind of cultures and accents and people all over the country.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. My friend is married to a man from Scotland, and sometimes I couldn't understand. He was speaking English, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. And then, even people from the UK. I mean, people from, say, London. Sometimes there's just different words for things. Like I got BritBox, so I've been watching a lot of British TV, and I'm learning like when they say bin that, they mean throw it away. So, but is it different there now? I'm sure the laws are different as far as transgender, queer, gay. I mean, what is it like now, different from when you were growing up?
So there is a lot more visibility now than there ever has been of queer identities and particularly of trans people. And it is both brilliant and has its disadvantages. I think in the UK, as in the US and many other countries, we've seen a general lurch towards the kind of righter wing of politics. Unfortunately, in the UK, there's a big anti-trans movement at the moment that has unfortunately gained a lot of traction. We have some fairly high-profile anti-trans voices, J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, of course, being one of them. And that has influenced public opinion somewhat.
Really?
So we have more recently had some relatively anti-trans laws be passed, and unfortunately, the UK is in a worse position when it comes to trans rights than it was 10 years ago. Um,
Wow.
Now, the visibility and awareness is a double-edged sword there, really, because more people than ever are able to discover themselves, and more people than ever are able to empathize and see trans people in the world. And I think that ultimately, one of the things that we've learned from thinking about sort of gay men and lesbians, the visibility they got, the backlash they got, but then the eventual acceptance that came that way. I think ultimately I have to hope that we're on a trajectory to more acceptance. It is just incredibly frustrating to see essentially a repeat of Section 28 happening with trans people, and particularly trans young people.
Yeah.
And it's a debate that has become so polarized. It is about banning people from bathrooms and banning people from sports and banning people from spaces, rather than about understanding and rather than about safety. It's become so polarized. Um, and I have to have hope that that will change, because if I lose that hope, it's a very depressing world indeed. But um, again, I think only by visibility and only by telling stories that involve people of all sort of gender identities and presentations and kind of levels of queerness and diversity do we get to a point where it is A, more normalized, and B, people can empathize with people more.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's really only through empathy that we can grow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, with the rise of social media, I have become way more aware of how many trans people there are in the world. Like, I never knew, in particular, how many women, how many trans men existed. Like, I just never really thought about it. Like I think it's amazing. There are people that I follow on social media that are so inspiring because they had the courage to follow their truth, even in their 60s, which was even more like, these are people who have grandchildren, and they are now, and it's just amazing that how freeing that is to finally be and look at yourself in the mirror and see who you've been feeling like inside all this time, is just so, I just can't imagine. Like, that's so amazing to be able to do that. And I just never realized until people started speaking up on social media, we're here and this is what and we're living, and this is what we did. And we took those steps to do the surgeries, to take the hormones, to make the changes we had to do. And some people are more informative than others about the journey on what it was like. Both the hard parts physically, even, and the, and the emotional struggles and the emotional triumphs, because how beautiful it is to finally feel who you feel like you always felt you were born to be. I'm just glad that we could see more of that now with with social media.
I do think it's wonderful that people are able to be themselves, and of course, age should never be a barrier to be able to come out. At the same time, I also hope that we get to a point where we don't have to have people coming out in their 60s and 70s because they weren't able,
Yes.
or felt like they had to hide it for the rest of their lives as well. I think people can go on a voyage of discovery about who they are at any age. but I don't want to live in a world where people have to spend 40 years being forced to live inauthentically because society has deemed they can't
Yeah.
be their true selves. And I
Yeah.
think that with the current kind of spate of laws that exist in the world, in many countries, that's a risk that we run at the moment is forcing people into closets and kind of forcing them to live unhappy lives until a time where it might be safer again to come out.
Yeah, that's very true. And I've hardly, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen one person that I've experienced or gotten to know regret making the transition. Like, I've never ran into one person that says, I changed my mind or I wish I didn't do it. Every single person spoken to is so grateful that they did it and that there was the opportunity to do it.
There
So,
are a lot of statistics around this, and this is interestingly something that anti-trans debates tend to ignore. There are lots of statistics around regret rates for people who have transitioned. And, you know, to be clear, transition doesn't necessarily mean that someone has gone on a defined journey through hormones and surgery or whatever. A social transition
exactly.
without medical intervention is just
True.
as valid as a medical transition. But the regret rates are so low for all of those milestones for people who socially transition, which of course is a completely reversible thing.
Yes.
And so much of the toxic debate around trans young people is not wanting people to do things that are irreversible. Well,
Yeah.
socially transitioning is completely reversible, and yet people are
Yes.
still very against it. But even people who have gone through surgery and hormones, the regret rate for that is lower than any other surgery. Any other surgery. I mean, even like knee surgery, it
Wow.
has a
That's
higher regret rate
interesting.
than transitioning.
That is interesting. Wow. Um, so your work, let's talk a little bit more about your work. So you have how many books? Do you perform poetry often, or what is your art like? Tell us about that, about your world of art.
Well, I am a bit eclectic, and I think that's because I get bored very easily. So I jump around between genres and topics and different things. Um, I love poetry. I've always loved poetry, and I think the interesting thing for me is that poetry is always there. It's in the background. It's the sand that fills in the cracks between everything else for me.
Oh, love that.
Writing a poem is how I make sense of the world. So if I'm having a day where I'm kind of thinking, oh, I can't quite process this, if I write a poem about it, that tends to help. So probably 90% of the poems I've ever written have never really been published or spoken, but they're there as a way of helping me process the world around me. Um, so poems are always there, but I love telling stories. So whether it's writing, a play or an audio drama or a fiction novel. I mentioned earlier the Boy from Elsewhere that's coming out in February 2026. Um, there's always a story going on somewhere that I'm trying to tell. Um, so I have another novel out already called Hidden Lives that first came out a decade ago, and when I signed with my current publisher, they republished it in 2023. So that's a kind of standalone story, also featuring queer characters. That's a different story to the one that's coming out in February.
Mhm.
But then just this October, my most recent poetry collection was published. This is called Tube Lines, and it is a book full of poems that were written while I was riding the London Underground.
Oh.
So they're not all about trains. Some of them mention trains, but I wrote them all while I was sat on the tube. So
Oh,
for me, public transport is like the ultimate place to do people watching.
absolutely. Yeah.
So these poems are just all about people and places and journeys and um, just that weird kind of liminal space that is you're on a small train hurtling through a tunnel and it's pitch black outside. So all there is just this situation with
Hmm.
these people that you're found with, and it the poems kind of write themselves in that space, and it was a way of kind of exploring the liminality, the people, the kind of weird sense of connection that you get with some complete stranger that you make eye contact with. Um, so I'd like to think that it's poems for everyone.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter whether you've been to London or not. It doesn't matter if you've been on a train or not. It's about those fleeting moments of connection that you have with people before they move on, and maybe you only ever see them once in your life, but they still have that kind of profound impact on your day.
That's such an interesting approach. I love that. That is just really, and then if you are a person that uses public transportation every day, do you use public transportation like regularly, or did you do this to write your poems? Because I would think if you did it every day, you probably and you're going to a destination like work or back home from somewhere, you probably tend to see the same people over and over, maybe, and maybe you do get to know who they are a bit or see their patterns.
So in the 5 years that I lived in London most recently, I used public transport quite a lot. I used the tube quite a lot. And I think it's kind of 50-50. So there were definitely, particularly on specific days and times I would travel, the odd people that you'd recognize. There was always a guy with a cat that would get on the train. He just had a cat on a leash that would stand on his shoulder. Um, if you got the train at the right time of day, you would always see him. Um, but also, I think the thing about London as a city as well, it's so ever changing and it's so transient. I mean, like there are 11 million people that live in London, but the city has like 30 million people moving through it every day. So
Wow.
only a third of the people that are using the city actually live there.
Yeah, yeah,
So you do see familiar faces, but that's kind of specks within a sea that changes constantly.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but you do see patterns emerging, like what kind of person goes to this particular station on a particular day, or um, you know, if you're riding the tube at just the right time, you can tell when the bankers have all decided to get that it's home time and that kind of thing, and it's just seeing the difference in people. It's a bit like tides. You get different waves, and the
Yeah,
tides come in and go out, and all these different kind of groups of people who are massively different but also share common characteristics kind of come and go.
right,
It's
right.
such an interesting and really kind of lyrical thing to experience, I think.
Yeah, that is interesting because for that moment in time, you're sharing the same vehicle to get to a destination and you're all in it together, so to speak, at that for that period of time. That's very really an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I just had to. I think I started giving myself over to just being an observer, to just being in the moment,
Yeah.
and that was when I started really. I just started. I had this little notebook, and it's illegible because obviously the train moves so much. Only I
Oh,
can just about make out what I'd written. Um, but I just sat there and just kept writing, and for 5 years just wrote and wrote and
Wow.
wrote. And then it came together as this collection of poems.
That's awesome. And where can we get your work? Where could people find your books and your poetry?
So wherever you can find books, you can find my books, is generally what I say. So all of my books are available online through the usual suspects. If you have a bookshop that you tend to go to, they should be able to order it through whatever their catalog system is.
Mhm.
I'm really lucky to be published internationally, so that works in pretty much whatever country you're in. But you can always go directly to my publisher's website as well. So my publisher is called Reconnecting Rainbows Press. They're great because they focus on queer artists telling queer stories, which is
Oh,
great.
nice.
So you can always go to reconnectingrainbows.co.uk and check out my stuff, and also the various other very cool queer authors that are part of that publisher as well.
I can't wait. I feel like I want to read all of your stuff, but particularly the one where what did you call that? The poetry where you were writing on the tube?
It's called Tube Lines.
Tube lines. I love that. So the tube is like what we call a subway here, right? Is it underground?
Yeah, so the official name for it is the London Underground, but the nickname for it is the Tube.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
I'm
and
gonna
it
look for
has
that.
it has different lines like the Bakerloo line, the Jubilee line, the Elizabeth line. So Tube Lines, the name of the book kind of came from that. Lines written on the tube whilst riding the lines of the tube.
So you were kind of like a fly on the wall, so to speak, for 5 years and on the. Did you always go in the same car, or is it different cars, or is it set up like
No,
a subway, or?
made a point of trying to once I realized that I was writing poems about the tube, I'd made a point of trying to do as many different journeys as possible.
Yeah.
So I've been on all of the different lines of the London Underground. I have been to many different stations in all the different zones. It's a really complex transport system, the tube. So it took me a while to explore, but I always tried different things, and many of the poems reflect that and are about the differences between what it's like riding on different lines at different times of the day.
Did you write about the guy with the cat on the leash? Did you write a story about him? A poem?
Interestingly, no, he's been written about quite a lot online,
Oh,
and
really?
he didn't actually end up featuring in any of my poems directly.
Oh,
Um, but there are poems about people. There are poems about train stations. There are poems about some of the announcements that you hear,
oh,
um,
wow.
about the
So
feelings you
interesting.
get while you're sat on the trains, about the stations, and just about how how humans behave. So it's a real mix.
That is so cool. So, when you decided that you were going to start writing in this fashion, were you out? Like, how did you, if you grew up with not a lot of exposure to LGBTQ people, so did you come out? Was there a coming out episode, or did it just kind of happen? Or did you use the art to do it?
The answer is kind of yes and no, I think, to that. So I've been writing since I was young. I think I first started writing when I was sort of 4 or 5. I'm not saying it was very good back then, but I loved the act of it. I loved the art of it. And yeah, I grew up in a house where people wrote. I mean, my mum was a writer; she was a songwriter, and so I knew that that was something that people could do, and that was great. Um, I also kind of always knew that I was queer. I just didn't necessarily have the language for it.
Yeah.
So I I only really learned to be ashamed of that and to hide it after I'd already accepted it in myself. So I had this interesting experience where I was kind of quite happy with the fact that I was queer, but didn't really know the words for it. And then as I learned the words for it, I learned that I shouldn't be proud of that. So
Oh,
hid it from the world, but not necessarily from myself.
yeah,
When it came to coming out, I think it was a slow process and one that has just repeated over and over and over. There was no kind of one coming out moment for me, and I've also, as my understanding of myself has evolved over the years, that that has led to other coming outs.
yeah,
So I originally came out as a gay man, and I did that at kind of 12 or 13 to my best friend, and then kind of 15 to a couple of other friends, and then at 16 to my mom, and at 17 to my brother, and at 18 to my dad, and then then I went off to university and had to come out to a whole bunch of people there, and then I got into my late 20s and thought, oh shit, I'm not cisgender.
got
I
more
need to come
people.
out to everyone. And then you go around and do the whole loop again. It's like, okay,
Uh,
well, I've got to tell my best friend now. I've got to tell my mom again. Now I've got to tell my brother again. So it's a never ending story, really. And I think that's also one of the things that people that have never had to come out as anything, people that have never had to stand up and say, hey, I'm not what you assume me to be,
yeah, yeah,
don't understand the idea that coming out is a lifelong process.
yeah.
It's not
True.
something you do once.
That's true.
There are milestones, there are big milestones, there are little milestones, but it's not a one time thing. And, and sometimes you can think you're done with coming out, and then, 10 years later, you realize there's a whole bunch more of it to do.
Yeah.
Um, But I think throughout all of that, art has definitely helped me.
Hmm.
Um, I distinctly remember when I first wanted to come out to people as non-binary. I did a piece of writing about it, and it was specifically aimed at close friends, so it wasn't something I published. But I found the best way to explain in the kind of the best way I knew how was to write kind of a piece of prose about it, which I did and sent to people.
Yeah.
And I kind of said, rather than saying to people, "Hey, I need to tell you something. I'm this," I kind of said to people, "Hey, I need to tell you something. Please read this for an hour and a half, and then
Uh,
come back to me with any questions you have."
ah, that's interesting. That I think that was true of my very first CD that I or album. We called it making, recording a CD back then in the 90s, but it was an album. We still call them albums. So anyway, my first album was basically that, and anyone who paid attention to the lyrics got what I was saying and what that was about. And so the women knew that listened to that first album what that was about. The women in the lesbian bars knew. So yeah, I think that if you are an artist, it's a special kind of gift that you can use to help the process of letting people know, people who are paying attention. Like you said, read the book and come back and ask me any questions. They'll get that.
Absolutely.
That's actually a great approach. I am so happy that we got to meet. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing your story.
Well, likewise, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
How can we find you? You told us where we could find your books. Like, how can we find you for performances, poetry readings, and anything new that's coming out?
So generally, I will put anything either on my website, which is you can go to kestr.al. So it's my name, but with a dot before the AL. And that'll take you to my website that has a sort of newsletter and various things around events and things on. Or you can find me on social media. So I'm on Instagram and places. Just look for kes.tr.al. So I go by my first name, Kestral, on social media and all of that. Just search for me online and you can find me generally. And I tend to post when things happen there.
That's awesome. Well, I am definitely going to be visiting your site. I'm going to be getting your books. I can't wait to read more of your work. Are you going to be coming to the U.S. anytime soon?
I do come to the US often. I spent some time living out there when I was younger, and I have friends in the US. I was last out in October this year.
Ah,
I may be visiting at some point in 2026. When I do, it tends to be around the sort of Maryland area,
oh, okay. That's
I
beautiful.
I do travel, so I'll be sure to let you know the next
Let
time
me
I'm in
know
the
if
US.
you're ever here in sunny Florida. I would love to come and see you do a reading.
I've never been to Florida, so that is definitely on my list somewhere.
All right, we'll show you some palm trees and sand.
Sounds beautiful.
All right. I have a place you could read your poetry if you want to come and do that. Get in touch and let me know when you're coming down.
Oh, well, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, happy holidays and thank you so much for being on the show. Thank
Thanks so much. Take care.
care. Bye.
Fighters, we won't back down. Voices loud, tearing through the ground. Every wound's a badge we wear with pride. Never surrender. We've got the fire inside. Told to hush, told that we're too loud, but we scream and we'll never bow. Tears and scars forge this steel. No more doubts, this power's real. We are unbroken, we're the storm. All their rules, we've torn apart the norm. No apologies, hearts ablaze, we're the sun, we're the endless days. Rise up, fighters, we won't back down. Voices loud, tearing through the ground. Every wound's a badge we wear with pride. Never surrender. We've got the fire inside.